Hey guys, and welcome to another video. Today's video is all about the Philodendron Variegated Melanochrysum, and this plant I really love. I purchased it for a lot of money about almost a year ago, and we've been on quite the journey together. So I will tell you a little bit about that journey and also how I look after this plant. So if this is a plant on your wish list, then this is the video for you. So let's get into it. So I purchased this plant in July of 2023, so we're coming up to almost 12 months of being together, and I purchased this plant as a very tiny baby plant, and I'll put a photo of how small it was when I got it. And I had it growing in some pretty drastic conditions because I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to die and I was going to waste all the money that I spent. So it was growing in an enclosed box that was on a heat mat and had a grow light. So it was receiving pretty much 100% humidity, and it was a little bit more on the warmer side and had some really good light. And it loved that, obviously, and was starting to produce a lot of leaves pretty quickly. I noticed with the leaves that it was producing, it had some aerial roots that were seeking out something to climb against. So I did end up putting it on a moss pole about 2 months later, and that's when things really started to decline, and it started to produce these leaves that were really confused and they were just misshapen, and I couldn't quite work out what was going on. It was either that it wasn't receiving its enclosed box conditions that had really good humidity, or it was the fact that I had to repot it to place it on a moss pole. So the thing that I did to combat this was I didn't change the conditions that it was growing in, because it needed to acclimatize to the conditions in my house, because that's where it was going to be growing. It can't stay in its little enclosed box forever. And all I did was look for a leaf on the stem that wasn't misshapen and made a cut on the stem before that leaf. So I did lose a lot of the growth, but I was hoping that it would just start to grow nicely, and that's exactly what it did. So these are all of the leaves that it started to grow when I cut the stem, and this is how I look after the plant. The lighting requirements for this plant are a bright indirect sunlight, and it's definitely one of those plants that would benefit more so from a lower sunlight position rather than a really bright sunlight condition. And the thing that I mean with that is if you're providing light that is way too bright for this plant, it is going to produce leaves that look a little bit sun bleached, and it is also a variegated plant, so we need to take that into consideration with the lighting that it has. The variegated part of the leaves are a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more fragile to brighter sunlight. So how do you know if you're not providing enough sunlight for this plant? There's two things to look out for, and the first thing is the space between each leaf, which is the internodal space. If that is quite elongated and the plant's just looking very leggy and stretched out, it's basically reaching out for more sunlight. So if it's starting to look like that, then if you can provide a grow light or increase the sunlight that it receives, it will definitely start to produce a little bit smaller of a length in between each leaf. The other thing to look out for is if each leaf is not increasing in size, then you want to increase the sunlight that it's receiving. So with this plant, you will probably have it on some sort of support because it is a climbing plant. You will notice that each leaf will gradually be getting bigger as it starts to climb up that support that you're providing. So if a leaf is a little bit smaller than its previous leaf, increase the sunlight and it should start to get back on track. So like I mentioned before, this plant is a climbing plant, so you will need to provide some sort of support and something for it to climb up. And the best thing for that is a moss pole, and the substrate that I think works really well for this plant is just sphagnum moss in your moss pole, because it does like to have a pretty heavy watering and it definitely doesn't like to dry out. So having some sphagnum moss in your moss pole, but also just providing a little bit of air pockets in your moss pole is definitely what it likes. So the soil requirements for this plant is something that is going to have a lot of drainage because it is a plant that likes to be watered very frequently. So I have this plant potted up in a Aroid mix, and it definitely provides enough drainage for this plant that I'm not getting any root rot, but it's also not drying out between each weekly watering. This plant is also a heavy feeder, and I'm always providing nutrients with every single watering. I don't think it matters a huge deal about what nutrients you provide for your plant, as long as it has something that is in your water rather than just plain water. But in saying that, I also use Growth Technology Foliage Focus, which is a really good plant nutrient. So use that if you can. But I think anything that you use instead of plain water will definitely help this plant. The humidity requirements for this plant is pretty high, and when I initially placed it on a moss pole, I did set up a humidifier because I didn't want the transition from its little enclosed box to being out in ambient conditions to be super drastic, but it still had a tantrum over it, and I am not giving it a humidifier at all anymore. It's just in ambient conditions in my house. But the thing that I think is really important with humidity is if you're providing sunlight, which is going to provide some warmth, because this plant is a tropical plant, and if you're also watering it really regularly, having the heat from the sunlight and regular watering is going to create a lot of humidity. So I think that is exactly what it needs if you're not able to provide a greenhouse type of condition. I do also think that this is a great plant for a bathroom. So if you have some really good sunlight in your bathroom, put this plant in there because it will really enjoy the extra humidity from every bath or shower that you have. The leaves on this plant are a velvety type of texture, and with any velvet philodendron, you always want to make sure that you are cleaning your leaves. And the reason for this is because we obviously want it to look very nice, but when you have dust on your leaves, it's not able to adequately get sunlight through the leaf because it essentially has a cover on it from all of the dust. So if you are able to put your plant in the shower and give it a shower every now and then that is great. But if not, if you can provide a microfiber cloth or a damp sponge and just wipe over the leaves really regularly, then it will make sure that your plant is getting enough sunlight. So because this plant is variegated, the thing that I'm noticing with this plant is the variegated parts on the leaf are not being as big as the non-variegated parts. So I'll see if I can see, this is a good leaf. So on this leaf over here, you can see that the variegated part on the leaf is a lot smaller in the lobe compared to the side that isn't variegated. So this is just something that I guess is a little bit quirky with this plant, and you kind of just need to deal with it because the variegation is always very random, and that's just how the leaves will come out. But I am finding on this plant that the variegation is not very strong. So a lot of the leaves, especially like this leaf over here, essentially has no variegation at all. So I'm okay with how it's growing and how it has a little bit of, I guess, misshapen leaves. So that's what I'm doing to take care of this plant, and it has reached the top of its moss pole, which is very exciting. It's a big accomplishment for this tiny little plant that I purchased, and I will let it grow to the top of the next moss pole before I decide to start propagating it, because when it did give those misshapen leaves and I had to cut the stem, it was really disappointing, and I just don't want anything to happen to it now. So I'm just letting it live its little Melanochrysum life at the moment, and I don't want to disturb the peace. So thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it helpful. If you haven't already, if you could please like and subscribe, that would be amazing. And I do try and do videos every week, but it ends up being every fortnight because I am a uni student. But some very exciting news is I'm going to be finishing this semester in the next couple of weeks, which means I'm going to be doing a plant tour video because a lot of people have asked for that and they're very curious on the type of plants that I have. That will be coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks, so be sure to keep an eye out for that, and I will see you in the next video.